Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Shay. If you're new here, hello, welcome. I have Garrett here with us today. He's very focused on feeding child, and we're doing this outside because I was gonna set up a whole thing in the nursery, and I have not felt the vibe of recording videos for a while now. So we're just gonna do this outside while we've got some energy and it's a nice day. Today's video is all about the birth story. We're just going to kind of talk about everything that happened because it did not go according to plan. My whole plan was an unmedicated labor, and that did not happen. Garrett's going to be here to kind of throw in a little bit if there's just stuff that I'm forgetting, because there are some spots that are a little bit foggy for me as far as what exactly was happening. So starting with the doctor's appointment before I went into labor, we'd actually discussed possible induction just before 41 weeks, and this wasn't something that I really wanted, and it definitely wasn't like mentioned on my birth plan or anything. I do have a video all about my birth plan, so if you guys want to check that out, I'll post a link up top. But we did talk about induction at like 40 weeks and 6 days, and it just wasn't something I was about. So ended up that night I got home and started doing all sorts of things to try to induce labor, which literally included going for a jog for 2.5 miles, which was brilliant. We did a few kind of induction things and nothing really was working until I decided to go get on my horse. And then that night I started getting a little bit of cramping, and I didn't know if it was really contractions or if it was just similar to a Braxton Hicks. I'd been feeling Braxton Hicks for quite a while, since sometime in my second trimester. A little bit of tightening in my abdomen, but that was pretty much it. It wasn't like an actual cramping feeling. So I rode Sage at 40 weeks and 3 days and got that little bit of light cramping that night, and the next day I was still feeling a little bit of kind of cramping going into my doctor's appointment that day. Let him know that I was feeling these kind of potential contractions, and he was like, okay, no big deal, we'll just kind of keep your induction date and go from there. That night ended up having some pretty serious contractions starting about 9 o'clock. Our doctor wanted us to leave our house when the contractions were between 5 to 10 minutes apart because we are quite a ways from our hospital. Oops, that's very loud. So we stayed at home. I tried to let Garrett sleep as much as possible, which was not very good because I was moaning very loud because they hurt. So I don't think he really got all that much sleep. Not really. So
I'd sleep in 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Ended up getting some pretty serious contractions to the point of, okay, I thought that I would at least be like a 5 centimeter dilated. And when we got to the hospital, they finally checked me and everything, and that was at about 3:30 in the morning. They said you're at 3 centimeters, and I was just shocked because it was incredibly painful. And then they explained that that was most likely back labor more than anything, and that's where the killer was for me, because it was extremely painful. I was not expecting back labor to be that bad. I wasn't expecting back labor at all. They actually admitted me. They weren't going to, well, they had to wait for an hour, right? They waited for an hour to see if I would progress at all, and then finally admitted me at about 4:30, and they ended up moving me to the birthing suite and started up a lot of monitoring. So got me on the blood pressure, got his monitor, my heart rate monitor, everything going on all at once, and it was still super painful. So the benefit was the gal that was like 2 rooms down from me wasn't gonna have an epidural. She ended up getting an epidural, so the anesthesiologist was already there. They were just supposed to be on call that night, but they were already there, which worked out really well because I ended up getting an epidural, which again was not my plan. I really wanted an unmedicated labor, but the back labor was so intense, it was not going to go over well. And it was all because he was sunny side up, so instead of facing my spine, he was facing my stomach, which was not good. Is he good?
Gotta change the butt.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Oh no.
Maybe we're okay.
Are you sure?
I don't know.
Was it just a bad fart?
Possibly.
Oh god. He's good.
I hope so.
That one's on you.
No.
The last one actually was not cute. It wasn't like horrible.
There's nothing cute about shit.
I mean, I know that. When I got the epidural, which wasn't as bad as I anticipated it was going to be, I really did not like the idea of an epidural because I've had a lot of back pain all my life. So I've kind of just expected that an epidural was not going to be a good idea for me. The anesthesiologist was wonderful. He did such a great job at just explaining everything to me, was very quick, very efficient. He very much was just like, we're just gonna do this, and just got the catheter in there, and it was pretty wonderful once that was in. At that point, I was pretty exhausted. They did another check and I had dilated to 6 centimeters. Sometime less than 30 minutes after I got the epidural, my water broke, which for those of you that don't know, supposedly your contractions get incredibly painful after your water breaks.
Hey.
I'm sorry.
Oh, you're such a whiner. Listen, I need you to grow up already. I'm done with this crap.
I'm leaving that in the video. Supposedly contractions after your water breaks is super painful, partially because there's no amniotic fluid to be kind of a cushion for everything that's going on. So I was very, very, very grateful that I had just gotten an epidural before those contractions hit, because I kind of feel like if I had to go through those, I would have been screaming in pain because the back labor was so bad. Daisy, are we good? So the scary part was after my water broke, baby's heart rate started to drop, and it wasn't like consistently dropping. It was mostly with contractions that it would drop. And if I was in a weird position for him, that's when it would drop. So a lot of the staff came in. My doctor was in there. The other doctor was in there. My nurse was in there, and they were all trying to shift me into different positions, whether it was my left side, my right side, with an epidural, trying to get me onto my hands and knees, which we did manage somehow. With all of this, the first time it happened was really, really scary. Obviously the whole thing was scary of my child's heart rate dropping so much. It dropped from like 140-ish down to in the 50s. Is that right?
40s and 50s, yeah.
40s and 50s. So at some point his blood pressure also was dropping, which would make sense that it was happening at the same time as the heart rate, but I just don't remember if that started at the very beginning. The nurses were good about getting me straight on oxygen, as long as I was taking some really deep breaths with a lot of oxygen. That seemed to kind of help with bringing him out of this really low heart rate. First time it happened was really, really scary, but we managed to find a position that kind of worked. And then at that point, I have no idea what time it was anymore. Like, I think it was sometime around 8 in the morning or 10 in the morning. It was a lot of just shifting back and forth. And then after all of this shifting, my attendant came in and she finally said, okay, I think we're at 9.5 centimeters dilated. So we were almost there. He just needed to get past this little lip of my cervix. And she ended up kind of going in and pushing that lip back, which meant we were ready. However, we also needed to do some extra monitoring, which we ended up doing the fetal scalp electrode, which is a probe that they end up putting onto little Nugget's head to monitor the heart rate a little bit more effectively rather than doing the external monitor. And then of course we've got all the catheters and things, so the epidural catheter plus the urinary catheter, because obviously you can't get up at that point. Again, not a part of my birth plan, but that's fine. Once we finally hit that 10 centimeter mark, I was cleared to start pushing. The issue was every time that I did push, his heart rate would drop. And doctor couldn't quite figure out why, so she was thinking, you know, maybe the cord's just being pushed on, especially now that your water broke. There's no amniotic fluid there to keep the pressure off of the cord. So I had pushed a couple of times and they ended up doing, I don't remember what it was called, but they put in another catheter to flush my uterus with saline, which kind of acted as the amniotic fluid to build this kind of cushion around him and hopefully help reduce the heart rate dropping.
Whatever the hell it was that they did.
I know they shoved some fluid up me. Every time I pushed, heart rate would drop, and it really didn't matter what the doctors did to try to help at that point. It just was happening every time. So they finally came in with the surgeon, with the OB, and he said, okay, well, let's try to rotate him, thinking that part of the issue was just the fact that he was set aside up. So they were going to try to rotate him to get him to turn down. So the surgeon was kind of all up in my business, tried to shift him, couldn't really get it to work. So they were like, okay, let's just take some time. We discussed a little bit of potential vacuum, and then they briefly brought up C-section, which again, not a part of my plan, especially not when you go in with the mindset of having a unmedicated labor. A C-section is not at the forefront of your mind. Ended up discussing a little bit of vacuum, which I wasn't a fan of, but in a medical emergency, I am kind of okay with whatever. So they let me sleep for a little bit, and then all of a sudden, while I was sleeping, I didn't move at all, and his heart rate started to drop again. So that was a big sign to them. All of a sudden I had the nurses, the doctors, everyone was in the room, and it was immediately a discussion about a C-section. And it was a very, very quick discussion. I was very teary-eyed. I do remember bits and pieces of that point. Basically, I remember them saying, you need a C-section, we have to go. I cried so bad. Is that another burp?
Yep.
Good. We're figuring it out. I remember them handing Garrett his gown and just saying, put this on. And then they laid me down in the bed and immediately started wheeling me across the hall. And obviously the surgery suites are very, very bright, and it's a very different environment going from a dimly lit, calm birthing suite to a surgery suite. And I've been in a surgery suite so many times, but I've never been the one on the table. So I've done a lot in the vet field in a surgery suite, but it's a whole different experience to be under those bright lights and be the one that's completely vulnerable. They obviously are there as medical professionals. So at that point, you're just kind of a body that they need to fix. So being very, very vulnerable in the aspect that like everything was out in the open, with all of a sudden nurses that I hadn't seen before, doctors I hadn't seen before, a new anesthesiologist. So it was all very overwhelming, already emotional and everything. And then the anesthesiologist that was in there then, different one that did the epidural, all I heard him say was, we might have to put her out. And that made me freak out more. That really didn't help. And I kind of feel like, you know, you should have a little bit more tact in those situations, but I also understand that it is a medical emergency, and if shit needs to happen, shit needs to happen.
Oh, what I got to experience? I got to sit in the hallway and wait for them to tell me to come in. That was it.
That's
like,
pretty
okay.
much it?
Yeah,
really?
I just sat there, put on my gown, sat outside the door. I was like, okay.
You literally were just standing there waiting?
No, I was sitting in a chair.
Really?
That was it. He came out and said baby's heart rate's back to normal. Like, cool. So when do I go in? Like, when we're ready. Okay. And I sat there.
How long were you sitting there?
Probably 30 minutes.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
See, that's where this just kind of blows my mind, because I feel like it didn't go that long. Like, I feel like I was laying there on the table for maybe 10 minutes before you came in.
Probably 30.
Really? And then afterwards, you said that I was in there for like an hour while they were still sewing me up.
Probably an hour and a half, yeah. I didn't know what to do with this.
I didn't know what to do with it. Once they finally started, after Garrett had come in, they have me strapped down with my arms out to the side, and which I think is pretty typical for most C-sections, to be honest. They started cutting me open and everything, and then the weirdest part was when they tilted the whole table so my head was downhill, and I legit felt like they were digging up in my chest. And it was just the weirdest feeling, because they have this big panel in front of you so that obviously you can't see everything that's going on, because that would be an issue.
I thought it was cool.
I mean, it would be really cool if it wasn't me on the table.
I still thought it was cool.
I'm really glad you thought it was cool. I would have liked to see it if I wasn't the one on the table.
Well, next time we'll record it.
No, you can't record in there. Just take lots of pictures.
Next time we'll take more pictures.
I wish they'd said that we could take pictures.
Yeah, I know, right?
Beforehand. I was like, that would have been
Dicks.
cool. Dicks. It really felt like they were going to pull me off the table. And at one point, I think you said that you thought that I was coming off the table.
Yeah.
Because they just were like yanking. And I remember hearing from the nurses afterwards one of the nurses said that she locked hands with one of the doctors, literally interlocked fingers to try to pull our child out, and she thought that she was going to break her hand. So as much as
He's got a big head, kid. That's why.
He does have a big head. The good thing was my attending had said your pushes with an epidural were fantastic, but I think that kind of led to the issue because he was down in my pelvis at that point, and I think he was definitely stuck because they were yanking, and it was the weirdest feeling. Being downhill like that and not having anything to grip, because the pads only go out to past your elbow, and then your hand's just kind of hanging there. My issue at that point was I couldn't grab onto anything, and I just felt so unsteady, feeling like I was gonna go flying off the table. I also remember that my arms were shaking so badly because of the medication that they had used, and I couldn't stop. And I literally remember asking at one point, like, are my arms shaking too much? Am I like making this difficult for the doctors? And they were like, no, you're fine. And they were asking if I was okay because my arms just hurt so bad from the shaking that it just was painful. My jaw was chattering from all the shaking. Part of that also is because it's cold in a surgery suite, but mostly the medication. And when they first pulled him out, he was pretty quiet. And then I think, did they get him on the table?
Yeah, it was cold.
Him coming out. Because again, I didn't really see
coming
anything.
Out? What do you mean? No, I didn't see either.
Coming out of me.
Oh, I don't know. I just heard him screaming. And they said, do you want to hold him? I'm like, no.
Would you stop?
I don't know what to do with this thing.
You're not very helpful.
Anyways, then they handed him to me. I came and brought him over to you. You were happy. You cried.
I did
cry.
cry.
Like, okay, do you want to leave? Do you want to go with baby? Let's go do tests. Like, cool. Okay, bye.
And
I left her on the table.
And then he ditched me, and I was by myself. But I was.
It felt like forever.
It did and it didn't. I feel like I sat there thinking like, okay, this should be over soon. This should be over soon. It should be over soon. And then it just was still going.
Yep.
Over and over and over. I was
I
like,
felt
are
too.
you guys done yet? I could not stop the shaking. That was the I was gonna say that was the worst part. You know, the worst part of all this might have been my child's heart rate dropping. But the shaking was pretty bad. After all was said and done, after I got all resutured back up and everything, Garrett had baby in the room. They did all their tests, which obviously I wasn't a part of while they were trying to put me back together. They got me back into the room. My arms were still really shaky, which to me was super scary because I wanted to be able to hold my child, especially for skin to skin. That was a big part for me when it came to the unmedicated labor, is I wanted him to be on my chest immediately. And obviously with a C-section, that doesn't exactly happen. So I was a little bit worried that my arms were shaking so bad that I wasn't going to be able to hold my own child. By the time I was out of there, I think I had probably 6 blankets on me to try to warm me back up because I was just freezing at that point. My arms wouldn't stop shaking. So then they took my temp and I was at 102.8, and I was like, I don't understand why I have such a high temp right now. And they said that they thought it was an infection in my uterus. Infection of the lining of the uterus? Is that what they said?
They were doing antibiotics to prevent that.
That was the whole issue with having such a high temp, is they were worried about infection at that point. So they had the compression sleeves on my legs. One would pulse on the left and then it would switch over to the right and pulse and just kind of go back and forth. That was to help with the blood flow because obviously when you're not moving, your legs get very swollen when you're given a ton of IV fluids. And I had a ton of IV fluids. I also was put onto 3 different antibiotics. Everything was like fine after that. Nugget was good. They ended up saying that the issue was that his cord was wrapped around his neck and then long around his body, like between his legs. Is that the way it was? So, and it was a short cord. So he had a whole hot mess of umbilical cord going on, which explains why every time that I pushed, I was just putting more tension on the umbilical cord, which would cause some constriction and a drop of the heart rate, drop of blood pressure. So it makes sense. It just kind of sucks that things worked out the way they did. We are very much of the mindset in our life that everything happens for a reason. This was supposed to happen the way it did for a reason. I haven't quite figured out what that is yet. We are safe and home. It's been about 2.5 weeks, 2.5, since we have gotten home. The hardest part about recovery for me specifically was the fact that I couldn't do the regular things that I was expecting to still be able to do. So I was expecting with a vaginal birth to still be able to do things. I was still expecting to be able to do household chores, which might have been a little bit silly, but what I wasn't expecting was not being able to get in and out of my own bed, not being able to get off the couch on my own, not being able to use the bathroom on my own. That was also really difficult. Trying to take a shower and wash my legs was really hard. So that was all things that I had to really try to have some patience with myself for, which was a whole struggle. And I think I'm gonna have a whole other video about my mental health, about recovery and all that. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. Maybe the whole point of me going through a C-section is just to share my story with people, to know that it's okay to go through an unmedicated labor, to all of a sudden have an unplanned C-section, and it's okay, and we're gonna survive, and it'll be fine. It took a lot to get here, but we're making it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye guys.
Free baby to get home.
Great.